Section 44 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Erik Bjornsson. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 8, Chapter 9, Spheres of Action, Witchcraft, Part 7. Having thus provided reparation for the past and caution for the future, the Suprema sought to protect reputed witches from the inordinate zeal of the local authorities and to vindicate its exclusive jurisdiction. The commissioners were to be summoned one by one and made to understand the grief and just resentment of the Holy Office at the violence of the alcaldes and others towards those reported to be witches. They were to publish this, and let it be known that, as the High Court of Navarre had undertaken to punish these intermeddlers, it would be permitted to do so, but that in future the Inquisition would adopt rigorous measures to chastise all who intruded on its jurisdiction, as perturbers and impeders of the Holy Office. Confessors were instructed to require all who were guilty of defaming others to denounce themselves to the tribunal, for the discharge of their conscience and the restoration of honour of the injured, and priests were notified not to refuse the sacraments to those who reputed as witches, while commissioners were warned to confine themselves to their instructions and to act with all moderation. In this admirable paper we cannot help applauding especially the moral courage evinced in making reparation for the Logroño auto, which must have had the sanction of the Suprema. The whole witch epidemic of Navarre and the provinces of Biscay was evidently regarded as a delusion, but in view of the attitude of the Church for the last 2 centuries this could not be openly proclaimed, and the wisest course was adopted to repress, as far as possible, popular fanaticism, and to protect its victims for the future. The superstition was too inveterate to be easily eradicated, but the effort to protect its victims was not abandoned. There was the formula of an edict dated 16 the year left blank to be filled in, issued by Salazar, now senior inquisitor, and his colleagues, reciting that the prosecutions for many years had given them ample experience of the grave evils and obscuration of the truth, resulting from the threats and violence offered to those who confessed or were suspected of witchcraft, as many persons under pretext of kinship to the suspect, or to the person said to be injured, endeavour to force them to confess publicly, as to themselves and others, wherefore all persons were ordered to abstain from threats or inducements, so that every one might have free access to the tribunal and its commissioners, under penalty of rigorous punishment according to the circumstances of the offence. It is inferable from this that the people, distrusting the leniency of the Inquisition, discouraged application to it, and sought rather to obtain satisfaction extrajudicially. The virtual supervision assumed by the Suprema over all cases of witchcraft was exercised with a moderation which must have been greatly discouraging to believers. Under this impulsion the tribunals became exceedingly lenient, frequently exercising the power left to them of suspending cases. One that is exceedingly significant occurred in Valladolid in 1622. At the insistence of her confessor, Casilda de Pabanes, a girl of 19 from Villamel, near Burgos, presented herself and confessed that, at Christmas 1615, when she was 12 or 13 years old, she was sick in bed with a fever, and her parents had gone to mass, leaving the house locked up. Suddenly a neighbour, a widow named Marina Vela, appeared at her bedside, and with threats of killing her, forced her to rise and dress and accompany her to a hermitage in the vicinage, where they found a tall, naked man, dark and with horns like a bull, who welcomed them and made them strip to their shifts, with an exchange of indecent kisses. Then they dressed and returned. Although the house doors were locked, they entered, and she was again in bed before her parents came back. Then followed long details of other similar adventures, in which the presiding demon usually wore the form of a goat. He made her renounce God and wrote with her blood her name on a paper. She was provided with an incubus demon whom she could summon by breaking a stick. With Marina she entered houses at night, killing children with powders or by sucking their fingers. There is no allusion to the aquelarre, but all other features of witchcraft are minutely detailed. By Marina's advice she pretended to be possessed and was taken to San Toribio de la Ibarra to be exorcised by Fray Gonzalo de San Millan, to whom she confessed. The inquisitors examined and cross-examined her closely. Without her varying in her story, they sought without success for evidence of illusion or fantasy, but on investigation it was found that she was really sick of a fever at Christmas 1615, and that subsequently she seemed to tremble and be as one possessed. Confirmatory statements were procured from the frailes, and evidently in accordance with the instructions all means were exhausted of testing her confession. In any other land this victim of hysteric autosuggestion would have been, if not burnt, at least made an exhibition that would have spread the craze. But the tribunal, after carrying the ease through the preliminary stages, voted to suspend it without rendering sentence and to reconcile and absolve her in the audience chamber without confiscation. The same policy was followed in the few other cases brought before the tribunal. Maria de Melgar of Osorno, who died during trial, was given Christian burial in 1637. In 1614 it suspended the case of Maria Sanz of Trigueros, against whom there was testimony of witchcraft, and in 1641 it discharged with a reprimanded Maria Alfonso de la Torre, accused of killing cattle, although a witness swore to seeing her at midnight riding on a stick over a rye field, with a noise as though accompanied by a multitude of demons. When we compare these cases with the penalties inflicted at the period on vulgar sorceresses and poor old curanderas, for implied pact, it is evident that the Inquisition had reached the conclusion that witchcraft was virtually a delusion, or that incriminating testimony was perjured. This could not be openly published. The belief was of too long standing and too firmly asserted by the Church to be pronounced false. Witchcraft was still a crime to be punished when proved, but, under the regulations, proof was becoming impossible and confessions were regarded as illusions. It was difficult for the conservatives to abandon their cherished beliefs, and the canon episcopi remained a bone of contention. Torreblanca has no inklings of doubt. To him the aquelarre and all its obscene horrors are a reality. The witch is to be burnt, not for illusions but for acts, as the Church has decreed in so many constitutions. His book was duly licensed by the Council of Castile in 1613, but some censor presented a learned criticism of it, calling especial attention to this point, citing the canon episcopi and the experience of the Inquisition, and arguing that the feats attributed to witches transcended the powers of the demon. This was so effective that the license was withdrawn. Then Torreblanca produced a verbose and decursive defensa, in which he argued that the canon episcopi was apocryphal. He showed that the Church had always published such malefactors with death, so that either his critic or the Church must err, and the Church cannot, for it is illuminated by God. This was successful. His license was restored in 1615 and his work saw the light in 1618. Joffre, in his Notes to Ciruelo's Reprovacion, defends the canon episcopali, but finds in it three kinds of witches: those who renounce God and seek the aid of the devil, those who are superstitious and know that their illusions are the work of the evil spirit, and those who are deceived by them. And the witches of today are the same, whence he argues in favor of caution and a policy of clemency. Alberghini, about 1640, admits that the aquelarre is a phantasm, but he holds that none the less are witches apostates from God and devil worshippers, and he seems to think it still an open question whether those who kill by sorcery are to be relaxed, even if they truly repent and are converted. About the same time, all that an old inquisitor will grant is that even if there is illusion in the aquelarre, the witch ratifies all that is done there, when awake, dwelling on it with pleasure and anointing herself for the purpose. But he concedes that the deceits of the devil render necessary stronger evidence than in other crimes, and that, as he represents in the aquelarre phantoms of innocent persons, the testimony of accomplices must be fortified with other proofs. Nearly the same ground was taken in 1615 by Padre Diego Tello, S.J., as calificador in the case of an unlucky monomaniac on trial by the Granada tribunal, whom he sought to prove responsible by showing that the witches who fly with Diana and Herodias, as in the canon episcopi, had free will, rendering them culpable for their commerce with the demon. Even as late as towards the close of the 17th century, a systematic writer holds it as certain that witches renounce their faith, adore the demon, and enter into a pact with him, and if this can be proved by confession or witness, they are to be punished as heretics with the regular penalties. Yet the Inquisition imperturbably pursued its way. It did not deny the existence of witchcraft or modify the penalties of the crime, but as we have seen, it practically rendered proof impossible, thus discouraging formal accusations, while its prohibition of preliminary proceedings by its commissioners and by the local officials, secular and ecclesiastical, was effectual in preventing the outbreak of witchcraft epidemics. So far as the records before me show, cases became very few after the Logroño experience of 1610. Scattering ones occur occasionally, such as those alluded to above, but in the Valladolid record from which they are derived, embracing in all 667 cases between 1622 and 1662, there are but 5 of witchcraft, of which the latest is in 1641. In Toledo, from 1648 to 1794, there was not a single one, nor is there one among the 962 cases in the 64 autos celebrated by all the tribunals of Spain between 1721 and 1727. It was not that popular belief was eradicated, for this is ineradicable, and still exists among all nations, but its deadly effects were prevented. Some fragmentary papers show that, from 1728 to 1735, there was a tolerably active investigation, in Valencia and Castellón de la Plana, into cases of mingled sorcery and witchcraft. There was evidence as to the use of ointments by which persons could transport themselves through the air and pass through walls, and as to people being bewitched and rendered sick, showing that the superstition had as firm a hold as ever on the lower classes. In 1765, at Callosa de Ansaria, Alicante, when some young children disappeared, it was attributed to Angela Piera, who had the reputation of a witch, able to fly to Tortosa and back, and who was supposed to have killed them for her incantations. These scattering cases became rarer with time. In a record of all the operations of the Spanish tribunals from 1780 to 1820 there are but 4. In 1781, Isabel Casgar of Malpica was accused as a witch to the tribunal of Saragossa. In 1791, at Barcelona, Maria Vidal y de Cardo of Tamarit, a widow aged 45, accused herself of express pact with the demon, of carnal intercourse with him, of presence 4 times a week at the aquelarres, where she adored him as a god, and having trampled on a consecrated host and flung it on a dunghill, a case which forcibly recalls that of Casilda de Pabanes in 1622 as an illustration of the hypnotic illusions which aided so greatly in the dissemination of the belief. The latest cases are 2, occurring in 1815, of which details are lacking except that they were not brought to trial. End of section 44.